The morning sun filtered through the grand windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Prince William stood in his private study, staring at an ornate wooden box that had arrived just hours earlier. The box bore the royal seal, and attached to it was a handwritten note from his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II. His hands trembled slightly as he read the words again. "My dearest William, the time has come for you to receive what your mother left for you. She made me promise to give this to you when you became a father yourself." The weight of those words pressed heavily on his chest. It had been over 2 decades since Princess Diana's tragic death in that Paris tunnel, yet the mention of her still brought a sharp ache to his heart. William had grown up knowing that somewhere, locked away in the royal vaults, were personal items his mother had left specifically for him and Harry. But he had never imagined receiving them would feel so overwhelming. Catherine noticed his distress from across the room where she sat reading to their young son George. She had learned to recognize the subtle changes in her husband's demeanor whenever anything related to his mother came up. The way his shoulders would tense, how his breathing would become slightly more measured, as if he were preparing himself for an emotional blow. She quietly closed the children's book and approached him, her footsteps barely audible on the Persian rug. "What is it, darling?" she asked softly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. William showed her the note, watching, as her eyes widened with understanding. Catherine had never met Diana, but she had lived with her memory every day of their marriage. The comparisons in the press, the constant references to what Diana would have thought or done, the way William would sometimes get that distant look when he spoke about his mother's charitable work. William's mind drifted back to his childhood, to those precious moments when his mother would sneak him and Harry away from the rigid protocols of royal life. He remembered her laugh, how it could fill an entire room and make everyone around her smile. He thought about the time she had taken them to a theme park, how she had screamed with delight on the roller coaster while trying to keep her hat from flying off. Those memories felt both crystal clear and impossibly distant. The box sat unopened on his desk, its presence somehow growing larger with each passing minute. William had always been the more cautious of the 2 brothers, the one who thought things through carefully before acting. Harry would have ripped the box open immediately, eager to discover whatever treasures lay inside. But William found himself paralyzed by the possibilities. What if the contents were too painful? What if they brought back grief he thought he had learned to manage? George, now 3 years old, wandered over to investigate the ornate box that had captured his father's attention. His small fingers traced the intricate carvings on its surface, his innocent curiosity a stark contrast to the heavy emotions filling the room. "What's in the pretty box, Papa?" he asked, his voice carrying that particular clarity that only children possess. William knelt down to his son's level, struggling to find words that would make sense to a toddler. How do you explain to a child about grandmothers they'll never meet, about love that transcends death, about the complex emotions that come with inheriting pieces of the past? "It's something very special from Granny Diana," he finally managed, his voice catching slightly on her name. The afternoon stretched on, and still the box remained unopened. William found himself making excuses to avoid it. He attended to correspondence, made phone calls about upcoming royal engagements, even spent time in the garden with George, teaching him to kick a football. But no matter what he did, his thoughts kept returning to that wooden box and whatever secrets it held. As evening approached, Catherine suggested they put George to bed together, their nightly routine providing a comforting normalcy. They read stories, sang lullabies, and tucked their son in with the same care and attention Diana had once given to William and Harry. The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. William lingered in the nursery after George had fallen asleep, watching, his son's peaceful face in the dim light from the hallway. She would have loved him so much. William whispered to Catherine as they finally left the nursery. It was a thought that brought both comfort and sadness. Diana had dreamed of being a grandmother, had spoken often about the joy of watching her sons become fathers themselves. Now George would grow up with only stories and photographs, never experiencing her warm hugs or hearing her infectious laughter. Back in the study, the box seemed to be waiting patiently. William poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did, but tonight felt like an exception. The amber liquid burned slightly as he swallowed, a welcome distraction from the emotions churning in his stomach. Catherine sat beside him on the leather sofa, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of his feelings. "You don't have to open it tonight," she said gently, "or tomorrow, or ever, if you don't want to. There's no timeline for grief, William. There's no right way to handle something like this." But William knew he couldn't avoid it forever. His mother had left this specifically for him, had trusted that someday he would be ready to receive whatever message or memory she had carefully preserved. The thought of disappointing her, even in death, was somehow worse than facing whatever pain the box might contain. As the clock struck 9, William finally stood and walked to his desk. His hand hovered over the ornate handle of the box, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure Catherine could hear it from across the room. This was the moment that would change everything. The moment when the past would reach out and touch the present in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The handle felt cool under his palm, smooth from age and careful craftsmanship. As he began to turn, William closed his eyes and whispered a quiet prayer to his mother, wherever she might be. The mechanism clicked softly and slowly, carefully, he began to lift the lid. The first thing William saw was tissue paper, delicate and yellowed with age, carefully wrapped around something precious. His breath caught in his throat as he gently peeled back the layers, revealing a small leather journal bound with a faded blue ribbon. The leather was soft and worn, as if it had been handled countless times. On the cover, in his mother's unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "For my William, when you become the father, I know you will be." Tears began to blur his vision before he could stop them. These weren't the controlled, dignified tears he had learned to shed at state funerals and memorial services. These were the raw, unguarded tears of a son who missed his mother with an intensity that sometimes took his breath away. Catherine moved closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind, her own eyes glistening as she watched her husband confront this deeply personal moment. With trembling fingers, William opened the journal to the first page. Diana's elegant script filled the cream-colored paper, and as he read her words, it felt as though she were speaking directly to him across the years. "My darling boy," the entry began, "if you are reading this, then you have become a father, and I am so proud of you, even though I cannot be there to see it. I want you to know that every day of your childhood, I saw the man you would become, and I knew that someday you would be the most wonderful father." The journal contained dozens of entries, each one dated and filled with Diana's thoughts about motherhood, her hopes for William's future, and her own struggles with raising children in the spotlight of royal life. Some entries were practical, advice about bedtime routines and dealing with tantrums. Others were deeply emotional reflections on the balance between duty and family, between public service and private moments. One entry, dated just weeks before her death, stopped William, cold. "Today, William asked me if I would always be here to protect him and Harry. I couldn't bring myself to make a promise I might not be able to keep. Instead, I told him that a mother's love doesn't end, even when she can't be physically present. I hope someday he will understand what I meant. I hope he will feel my love surrounding him and his children, even when I am gone." William had to close the journal and step away, the emotions too intense to bear. He walked to the window, looking, out at the carefully manicured gardens where he and Harry had once played while their mother watched from this very window. The memory felt both distant and immediate, as if time had folded in on itself, bringing the past and present together in this sacred moment. Catherine quietly approached the box and discovered there were more items beneath the journal. She lifted out a small silver locket, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Inside was a tiny photograph of William as a baby, sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. The image was so small it could barely be made out, but Diana had kept it close to her heart for years. There was also a collection of letters, tied together with the same blue ribbon as the journal. These were notes Diana had written but never sent, letters to William's future wife, to his unborn children, to the family she would never meet, but loved already with all her heart. One letter was addressed simply to "my son's beloved," and Catherine's hands shook as she realized it was meant for her. "William," she called softly, her voice thick with emotion. "There's a letter here for me." He turned from the window, his face streaked with tears he no longer tried to hide. The sight of his wife, holding a letter from his deceased mother, created a surreal bridge between his past and present. Catherine opened the envelope carefully, as if it contained something fragile and irreplaceable. Diana's letter to her future daughter-in-law was both heartbreaking and beautiful. She wrote about her hopes that William would find someone who would love him completely, not for his title or position, but for the kind and gentle man she knew he would become. She expressed her regret that she wouldn't be there to welcome this special woman into the family, to share in the joy of their wedding day, or to offer guidance during the challenging early years of marriage. "Please help him remember that he is more than his duty," Diana had written. "Help him laugh, help him play, help him find moments of pure joy away from the weight of expectation. And when you have children together, please tell them about their grandmother who loved them before they were even born, who dreamed of holding them and spoiling them and teaching them to find their own path in this complicated world we live in." The letter continued with Diana's observations about William's character, insights only a mother could possess. She wrote about his sensitivity, his desire to help others, his struggle with the burden of his future role. She encouraged Catherine to be patient with his tendency to overthink decisions, to understand that his caution came from a deep sense of responsibility, and to never let him forget that he deserved happiness just as much as anyone else. As Catherine read portions of the letter aloud, William found himself seeing his mother through new eyes. This wasn't just the Diana he remembered from his childhood, the loving but sometimes sad woman who tried to shield him and Harry from the complexities of their world. This was Diana, the wise mother, the woman who understood her son so completely that she could offer guidance to his future wife from beyond the grave. The evening grew late, but neither William nor Catherine wanted to stop exploring the contents of the box. Each item told a story, revealed another facet of Diana's love for her son. There were pressed flowers from the gardens at Highgrove, small sketches Diana had made of William and Harry sleeping, and even a silly drawing William had made for her when he was 6 years old, carefully preserved between sheets of protective paper. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in the softest silk, was Diana's engagement ring. The same ring William would later give to Catherine, but seeing it here, in this context, made its significance even more profound. Attached to it was a note explaining that Diana wanted William to give this ring to the woman he chose to marry, not as a symbol of the past, but as a blessing for his future. "She knew," William whispered, holding the ring up to catch the lamplight. "Somehow she knew that this ring would find its way to you." Catherine looked down at her left hand, where that very ring now caught the light with the same brilliance it had years ago in this box. The connection felt magical, as if Diana had orchestrated this moment from wherever she now resided. It wasn't just coincidence that had led William to propose with his mother's ring, it was destiny, guided by a mother's enduring love. As the night deepened around them, William and Catherine continued to explore the treasures Diana had left behind. Each item was a piece of her heart, carefully chosen and lovingly preserved for this moment when her son would need to feel her presence most acutely. The box had contained more than objects. It held a mother's eternal love, her hopes, her dreams, and her unwavering faith in the man her little boy would become. The following morning brought an unexpected visitor to Kensington Palace. Prince Harry arrived unannounced, his face etched with the same emotional exhaustion that had kept William awake most of the night. Word had reached him about the box from their grandmother, and he had flown back from his charitable work in Africa immediately. The brothers hadn't been speaking regularly since Harry's decision to step back from royal duties, but grief had a way of dissolving petty disagreements. "Did you open it?" Harry asked without preamble, his voice rough with emotion and travel fatigue. William nodded, gesturing toward the box that still sat open on his desk, its contents spread across the surface like pieces of a sacred puzzle. Harry approached slowly, almost reverently, his eyes taking in each item that represented their mother's love. The silence between the brothers stretched for several minutes as Harry examined the journal, the letters, the small mementos that Diana had chosen to preserve. When he picked up a small wooden toy soldier, painted in the bright colors of the Welsh Guards, his composure finally cracked. William remembered that soldier. Their mother had bought it for Harry during a visit to a military museum when he was barely 5 years old. Harry had carried it everywhere for months, creating elaborate battles and adventures in the nursery. "She kept everything," Harry whispered, his voice breaking on the words. "Even the silly things we thought didn't matter." William watched his younger brother with a mixture of understanding and protective concern. Harry had always worn his emotions more openly, had struggled more visibly with their mother's death. While William had learned to compartmentalize his grief, to function despite the constant ache of loss, Harry had often seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of his feelings. "There's something else," William said quietly, reaching into the box to retrieve an envelope marked, "For both my boys." His hands trembled as he opened it, revealing a letter written on Diana's personal stationery, the paper slightly fragrant with the perfume she had always worn. The letter was longer than the others, filled with Diana's hopes and fears for both, her sons. She wrote about their different personalities, how William was the careful one who thought everything through, while Harry was the impulsive one who led with his heart. She encouraged them to always support each other, to remember that they were stronger together than apart, and to never let the pressures of royal life drive a wedge between them. "I know there will be times when you disagree," Diana had written, "times when your different approaches to life will cause friction. But please remember that you are brothers first, princes second. The bond between you is more important than any crown, any duty, any expectation placed upon you by others. Take care of each other, protect each other, and never forget that my love for both of you is infinite and eternal." Reading those words aloud, William felt the weight of recent tensions between him and Harry. Their mother's wisdom seemed to reach across time, reminding them of what truly mattered. Harry's eyes were streaming tears by the time William finished. Reading, and for the first time in months, the brothers embraced without reservation or awkwardness. "I've been so angry," Harry admitted, his words muffled against William's shoulder. "Angry at everyone, at everything. I thought leaving would make it easier, but I just felt more lost." William tightened his grip on his brother, remembering all the times their mother had held them both when they were children, usually when one of them had skinned a knee or had a nightmare. "She would want us to figure this out," he replied. "She would want us to be there for each other." Catherine, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward with George in her arms. The little boy had woken from his nap and was curious about the unusual sight of his father and uncle crying. Harry wiped his eyes and managed a smile for his nephew, grateful for the innocent distraction that only children can provide. "Uncle Harry!" George exclaimed, reaching out his arms. Harry took him gladly, spinning him around the room as George giggled with delight. The sound of his nephew's laughter seemed to lift some of the heavy sadness that had settled over the room. As the afternoon progressed, the brothers found themselves sharing memories they hadn't discussed in years. They talked about the time Diana had surprised them with a trip to an amusement park, how she had insisted on going on every ride despite the protests of her security detail. They remembered her terrible attempts at cooking when she wanted to, give the staff a night off, how she would burn the toast but somehow make it taste better because she served it with such love and laughter. "Do you remember when she taught us to dance?" Harry asked, a genuine smile crossing his face for the first time that day. "She said every gentleman needed to know how to waltz properly, but she kept stepping on our toes because she was laughing so hard." William nodded, the memory bringing warmth to his chest. "She made everything into an adventure, didn't she? Even the boring royal functions became games when she was around." They discovered that Diana had included specific items for Harry as well. There was a compass she had given him as a child, symbolizing her hope that he would always find his way home, no matter how far his adventures took him. There was also a photograph of the three of them on a skiing holiday, their faces red with cold and bright with happiness. But perhaps the most significant item for Harry was a small notebook filled with Diana's thoughts about his future. Unlike William's journal, which focused on fatherhood and family life, Harry's notebook was filled with encouragement about finding his own path, about using his compassion and rebellious spirit to make a difference in the world. "You have such a big heart, my darling boy," one entry read. "Don't let anyone tell you that your emotions are a weakness. Your ability to feel deeply, to connect with people who are hurting, is one of your greatest strengths. Use it to help others, but don't forget to take care of yourself too." Diana had somehow understood that Harry would struggle with the confines of traditional royal life, that he would need permission to forge his own way. Her words provided that permission, along with the reassurance that she would be proud of him, no matter what path he chose. As evening approached, the brothers made a decision that would have made their mother proud. They called their grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, and requested a private audience. Together, they drove to Windsor Castle, where they found her waiting in her private sitting room, surrounded by photographs of family members spanning decades. "I wondered when you would come," she said simply, her aged hands folded in her lap. "I've been carrying that box for 24 years, waiting for the right moment to give it to you, William. Your mother made me promise to wait until you became a father, but she also made me promise something else." The Queen's eyes, still sharp despite her advanced age, moved between her two grandsons. "She made me promise that when the time came, I would help you remember not just how she died, but how she lived. She wanted you to focus on the love, not the loss." The three of them sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own memories of Diana. The Queen had loved her. Daughter-in-law, despite their differences, had recognized the genuine warmth and compassion that Diana brought to the royal family. She had watched her grandsons struggle with their mother's legacy for years, and she was determined to help them find peace with it. "Your mother's greatest wish," the Queen finally said, "was that you would both find happiness. Not duty, not obligation, but genuine happiness. I think she would be pleased to see that you're beginning to understand what that means." The weeks following the opening of Diana's box brought unexpected changes to William's daily life. He found himself carrying the small leather journal with him everywhere, reading his mother's words during quiet moments between official engagements. Her insights about parenthood proved remarkably relevant as he navigated the challenges of raising George while fulfilling his royal duties. One particular entry resonated deeply during a difficult week when George was going through a challenging phase of bedtime resistance. Diana had written about similar struggles with William himself, how he had refused to sleep without hearing 3 specific bedtime stories read in the exact same order every night. She described the exhaustion of repeating the same routine endlessly, but also the precious intimacy of those quiet moments when the rest of the world disappeared. I realized tonight that these bedtime battles aren't really about sleep, Diana had written. They're about control, about having one small part of their day that belongs entirely to them. When I stopped fighting it and started seeing it as our special time together, everything changed. William fell asleep more easily, and I found myself looking forward to our quiet moments instead of dreading them. William shared this insight with Catherine, and together they transformed their own bedtime routine with George. Instead of viewing his resistance as defiance, they began to see it as his way of extending their time together. The shift in perspective made all the difference, turning a daily struggle into a cherished ritual. The journal also contained Diana's thoughts about balancing public duties with private family time. She wrote about the guilt she felt when royal obligations pulled her away from William and Harry, but also about the importance of showing them that service to others was a privilege, not a burden. Her words helped William understand that his own struggles with work-life balance were not unique, that even his beloved mother had grappled with the same challenges. During a state visit from the President of France, William found himself thinking about an entry where Diana described feeling overwhelmed by the formality and protocol of such events. She had written about creating small moments of authentic human connection, even within the rigid structure of state dinners and official ceremonies. Following her example, William made an extra effort to engage personally with the visiting dignitaries, asking about their families and interests rather than simply following the prescribed talking points. The French president's wife mentioned that she was a grandmother to twin boys, and William immediately shared a story about George's latest obsession with building blocks. The conversation became genuinely warm, and later the president commented to the press about the authentic warmth of the British royal family. William realized that his mother's approach to royal duties, combining genuine compassion with professional obligation, was still relevant and effective decades later. Harry's visits to Kensington Palace became more frequent after their emotional reunion over Diana's box. The brothers began planning a joint charitable initiative focused on mental health awareness, inspired by their mother's compassionate approach to helping others. They spent hours in William's study, surrounded by Diana's letters and mementos, discussing how to honor her memory through meaningful action. She always said that our privilege came with responsibility, Harry reflected during one of their planning sessions. But she also showed us that responsibility doesn't have to be joyless. She made helping others look fun, natural, like the most obvious thing in the world to do. Their grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, watched these developments with quiet satisfaction. She had hoped that Diana's final gift to her sons would help heal the rift between them, and she was pleased to see them working together again. During their weekly private dinner, she shared her own memories of Diana's early days in the royal family. "Your mother had a gift for making people feel seen," the Queen told William. She would remember the names of every member of the palace, staff, ask about their children, celebrate their personal milestones. It wasn't calculated or strategic. It was simply who she was. That quality is what made her so beloved, and it's something both you and Harry have inherited. The Queen's words reminded William of countless small moments from his childhood when Diana had demonstrated this gift. She would stop to chat with the gardeners about their prize roses, remember which security officer had a new grandchild, and always thank the kitchen staff personally after formal dinners. These interactions weren't part of her official duties. They came from her genuine interest in the people around her. William began incorporating this approach into his own royal engagements. During a visit to a children's hospital, instead of simply following the planned schedule, he spent extra time with a young patient who was clearly nervous about meeting a prince. The little girl eventually relaxed enough to show him her favorite stuffed animal, and their conversation about her pet hamster at home brought smiles to everyone in the room. The hospital staff later told the press that Prince William's genuine interest in their patients and families reminded them of Princess Diana's visits years earlier. The comparison, rather than feeling burdensome, now brought William a sense of pride and connection to his mother's legacy. Catherine noticed the subtle changes in her husband as he absorbed his mother's wisdom from the journal. He seemed more at peace with himself, less burdened by the weight of future expectations. The constant underlying tension that had characterized their early married years was gradually giving way to a more relaxed confidence. "Your mother would be so proud of the father you've become," Catherine told him one evening as they watched George play in the garden. "She would love seeing how naturally fatherhood comes to you." William pulled her closer, his arm around her waist as they stood at the window. "I keep hearing her voice in my head," he admitted. "When George has a tantrum, when he's being particularly sweet, when he's learning something new, it's like she's coaching me through it." The journal contained practical advice, but it also held deeper wisdom about the emotional aspects of raising children. Diana had written extensively about the importance of allowing children to express their feelings, even the difficult ones. She encouraged William to create safe spaces for emotional honesty, to validate his future children's experiences rather than dismissing them. One entry particularly struck William. "Today, William told me he was angry at God for making him a prince. I wanted to tell him that his anger was misplaced, that being a prince was a privilege. Instead, I sat with him and asked him to tell me more about his feelings. What emerged was not spoiled petulance, but genuine grief about the loss of privacy and normalcy that his position would always require. His anger was valid, and acknowledging it helped him process those complex emotions much better than dismissing them would have. This insight proved invaluable when George began asking difficult questions about why he couldn't do certain things that other children could do. Instead of offering simple explanations about royal duty, William followed his mother's example, encouraging George to express his frustrations while helping him understand his unique situation with age-appropriate honesty. The transformation in William was noticed by everyone around him. His staff remarked on his increased warmth and accessibility. Charitable organizations found him more engaged and personally invested in their work. Most importantly, his family life flourished as he applied his mother's wisdom to his relationships with Catherine and George. Diana's final gift was proving to be exactly what William needed at this stage of his life. Her words provided guidance without pressure, support without expectation, and love without condition. Through her journal, she continued to mother him from beyond the grave, helping him become the man and father she had always believed he could be. 6 months after opening Diana's box, William faced his most challenging test yet as a father. Little George had begun asking questions about his grandmother Diana, prompted by seeing her photographs throughout Kensington Palace and hearing family members mention her name. The 3-year-old's innocent curiosity about the grandmother he would never meet created an emotional minefield that William wasn't sure how to navigate. "Papa, why is Granny Diana only in pictures?" George asked one morning as they walked through the portrait gallery. His small hand pointed to a large painting of Diana in her sapphire blue engagement dress, her eyes sparkling with the same warmth that William remembered so vividly. William knelt down to George's eye level, his throat tightening with emotion. This was the moment he had been dreading and anticipating since George was born. How do you explain death to a child who has only known love and security? How do you share the weight of loss without frightening an innocent mind? Remembering his mother's journal entry about emotional honesty, William chose transparency over protection. "Granny Diana lives in heaven now," he said simply, using words George could understand. "She died before you were born, but she loved you very much, even though she never got to meet you." George processed this information with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children often bring to difficult concepts. "Does she watch me from heaven?" he asked, his curiosity genuine rather than fearful. "I believe she does," William replied, and in that moment, he realized he truly meant it. The months of reading Diana's letters and journal had convinced him that her love transcended death, that somehow she was still connected to her family in ways that couldn't be explained but could be felt. That evening, William shared the conversation with Catherine, and together they decided it was time to create new traditions that would help George understand his grandmother's legacy. They began reading him stories about Diana's charitable work, showing him pictures of her with children around the world, helping him understand that she was someone who cared deeply about helping others. Catherine suggested they create a special memory book for George, filled with stories about Diana that he could look at whenever he had questions. William loved this idea, and he spent hours carefully selecting photographs and writing simple explanations that a young child could understand. Each page celebrated a different aspect of Diana's life: her love for her sons, her compassion for others, her playful spirit, and her beautiful smile. As they worked on the book together, William found himself sharing stories with Catherine that he hadn't told anyone in years. He described Diana's terrible singing voice and how she would belt out pop songs in the car, completely off-key but with such enthusiasm that it was impossible not to join in. He remembered her competitive streak during family games, how she would cheat at Monopoly and then dissolve into laughter when caught. She wasn't perfect, William told Catherine as they selected a photo of Diana making a silly face at the camera. The press always wanted to paint her as either a saint or a victim, but she was just a person. A wonderful, complicated, loving person who made mistakes and learned from them. This balanced perspective became important when George began asking more complex questions. Instead of presenting Diana as an untouchable figure, William shared age-appropriate stories that showed her humanity. He told George about the time Diana had forgotten to pack snacks for a family outing and had to stop at a gas station, much to the confusion of her security detail. He described how she would sometimes burn dinner because she got distracted helping with homework, then order pizza and call it a special treat. The memory book project also helped William process his own grief in new ways. Looking at hundreds of photographs spanning Diana's life, he began to focus less on the tragedy of her death and more on the richness of her life. He saw her evolution, from shy kindergarten teacher to confident princess to devoted mother to global humanitarian. Each phase revealed different aspects of her character, different ways she had touched the world. One photograph particularly moved him. Diana sitting on the grass at Kensington Palace, her shoes kicked off, laughing as a very young William climbed onto her back for a piggyback ride. Her hair was slightly messy, her designer dress wrinkled from playing, and her face was radiant with pure joy. This was the mother he wanted George to know about, the woman who chose love and laughter over protocol and perfection. When the memory book was complete, William and Catherine presented it to George during their bedtime routine. The little boy examined each page carefully, asking questions about the pictures and listening intently to the stories. His favorite page showed Diana at a playground, going down a slide with William and Harry, all three of them laughing with abandon. "She looks fun," George declared, and William felt his heart swell with pride. Despite never meeting her, his son was already forming an accurate impression of Diana's joyful spirit. The memory book became a regular part of their bedtime routine, with George requesting specific stories about Granny Diana almost every night. William found that talking about his mother in this context, as George's grandmother rather than as his own loss, allowed him to celebrate her life without being overwhelmed by sadness. Word of the memory book project reached other family members, and soon William found himself helping his cousins create similar books for their own children. Diana's legacy was expanding to touch a new generation, not through formal memorials or public ceremonies, but through intimate family stories shared with love and honesty. Prince Charles visited Kensington Palace and was moved to tears when George proudly showed him the memory book. "She would love this," he told William, his voice thick with emotion. "She always worried about being forgotten, about her influence on you boys fading over time. This ensures that her love continues to grow, rather than diminish." The success of the memory book inspired William to think more broadly about preserving Diana's legacy for future generations. He began working with historians and archivists to create a comprehensive record of her life, not just the public moments that had been documented by the press, but the private family moments that revealed her true character. Harry enthusiastically joined this project, contributing his own memories and photographs. The brothers spent hours recording video messages for their future children, sharing stories about their mother that would ensure Diana's personality and values lived on through generations she would never meet. During one particularly emotional recording session, Harry shared a memory that brought both brothers to tears. "I remember when Mummy took us to visit a homeless shelter," he said, looking directly into the camera. "She didn't just make a charitable appearance and leave. She sat on the floor with a woman who was crying, held her hand, and listened to her story for over an hour. When we finally left, she was quiet in the car. I asked her why she was sad, and she said, 'I'm not sad, darling, I'm grateful.' That woman reminded me how lucky we are and how important it is to use our luck to help others." William added his own memory to the recording. "That night, she made us clean out our toy boxes and donate half of our things to children who had less. She didn't lecture us about privilege or responsibility. She just showed us, through her actions, what it meant to care about others. That's the grandmother I want your children to know about." These recording sessions became therapeutic for both brothers, allowing them to process their grief together while creating something meaningful for the future. They laughed through happy memories and cried through painful ones. But most importantly, they supported each other through the complex emotions that Diana's memory continued to evoke. The impact of the memory book extended beyond the immediate family. George began showing it to his friends during playdates, proudly explaining that his grandmother who lived in heaven had been very kind to people who needed help. Other parents were moved by the simple, honest way George talked about death and loss, and several asked William for advice on how to help their own children understand difficult concepts. William realized that his mother's final gift had accomplished something he hadn't expected. It had transformed his relationship with grief itself. Instead of being something to endure or overcome, grief had become a teacher, showing him how to love more deeply, parent more thoughtfully, and live more purposefully. Diana's death would always be a source of sadness, but her life had become an endless source of inspiration and guidance. As George's 4th birthday approached, William made the decision to take him to visit Diana's grave at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate. It would be George's first visit to his grandmother's final resting place, and William wanted to make it a celebration of her life rather than a somber memorial to her death. They planned the visit carefully, bringing flowers that George had helped, shoes, and a small toy soldier that reminded William of the one Diana had kept in her memory box. Catherine and William explained to George that they were going to a special place where Granny Diana rested, a beautiful island surrounded by water and trees where she could be peaceful. The day of the visit was bright and sunny, the kind of perfect English summer day that Diana had always loved. As they walked across the ornamental bridge to the island where Diana was buried, George chattered excitedly about showing his grandmother the drawings he had made for her. His innocent joy transformed what could have been a heartbreaking experience into something almost celebratory. At the gravesite, George carefully placed his flowers on the simple memorial stone, then sat cross-legged on the grass and began showing his drawings to the stone as if Diana could see them. William and Catherine watched in amazement as their Son carried on a one-sided conversation with his grandmother, telling her about his toys, his friends, and his plans for his birthday party. "I think she would like this," George announced matter-of-factly after finishing his presentation. "She looks like she would be fun to play with." William knelt beside his son, placing his own flowers on the grave. "She was the most fun person I ever knew," he said softly. "And I think she would love you very much." As they prepared to leave, George asked if they could come back again soon. "I want to tell Granny Diana about my birthday party," he explained. "And when I learn to read, better I can read her some of my books." Walking back across the bridge, William felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. The memory box had been the beginning of his healing, but this visit with George had completed something important. Diana's legacy wasn't just preserved in photographs and journals. It was living and growing through her grandson's innocent love and acceptance. That evening, as they tucked George into bed, he asked if he could keep the memory book in his room permanently. "I want to look at Granny Diana's pictures whenever I miss her," he explained with the simple wisdom that children possess. William agreed, understanding that his son had developed his own relationship with Diana's memory, separate from but connected to his own grief and love. The memory book had become more than a tool for explaining loss. It had become a bridge connecting generations, ensuring that Diana's love would continue to flow forward through time, touching lives she would never physically meet, but had already begun to influence through her enduring legacy of compassion and joy. 1 year after opening Diana's memory box, William stood in the same study where his journey of rediscovering his mother had begun, but this time he wasn't alone with grief and uncertainty. George, now 4 years old, sat at the small desk Catherine had moved into the room specifically for him, carefully drawing a picture with his colored pencils. Baby Charlotte slept peacefully in her bassinet nearby, her tiny fingers curled around. A soft toy rabbit that had once belonged to Diana. The wooden box still sat on William's desk, but it no longer felt like a weight pressing on his chest. Instead, it had become a treasure chest that he and his family visited regularly, each item inside serving as a stepping stone to conversations about love, loss, family, and the importance of helping others. The box had transformed from a source of pain into a wellspring of wisdom and connection. "Papa, is this a good picture of Granny Diana?" George asked, holding up his latest artwork. The drawing showed a stick figure with yellow hair wearing what appeared to be a crown, surrounded by other stick figures with their arms outstretched toward her. William examined the picture seriously, recognizing the care his son had put into every crayon stroke. "It's perfect," he said, meaning it completely. "I think she would love that you drew her helping other people." George beamed with pride, then carefully placed the drawing in a special folder they kept just for his artwork inspired by Diana's memory. The folder was already thick with pictures, each one representing another conversation, another story, another moment when Diana's love had reached across time to touch her grandson's growing understanding of the world. The transformation in William over the past year had been remarkable to everyone around him. The rigid self-control that had once defined his public persona had softened into something more authentic and accessible. He laughed more easily, spoke more openly about his emotions, and brought a warmth to his royal duties that reminded long time palace staff of Diana herself. During a recent visit to a cancer treatment center for children, William had spent nearly 3 hours beyond his scheduled time, playing games with patients and listening to their stories. When his staff gently reminded him of other appointments, he had smiled and said, "My mother taught me that schedules should serve people, not the other way around." The children's faces had lit up at his attention, and several parents later wrote to say that Prince William's visit had been the highlight of their child's difficult treatment journey. Catherine watched these changes in her husband with deep admiration and love. The man she had married had always been kind and dutiful, but the father and husband he had become since opening Diana's box was someone who had learned to lead with his heart as well as his head. Their own relationship had deepened as William became more emotionally available, more willing to share his vulnerabilities and fears. "Sometimes I feel like she's guiding us," William told Catherine one evening, as they watched George play in the garden where Diana had once pushed William on the very same swing. "Not in a supernatural way, but through the wisdom she left behind. Every challenge we face as parents, every decision about how to raise the children, I find myself asking what she would do." The journal entries continued to provide relevant guidance as their family grew and faced new situations. When Charlotte was born, William found an entry where Diana had written about the different ways she had loved each of her sons, how she had learned to appreciate their unique personalities rather than expecting them to be the same. This insight helped William embrace the distinct temperaments already emerging in George and Charlotte, celebrating their differences rather than trying to shape them into identical molds. Prince Harry had also been transformed by their shared exploration of Diana's legacy. His relationship with William had healed completely, strengthened by their mutual commitment to honoring their mother's memory through meaningful work. Together, they had launched the Diana Award for young people making positive changes in their communities, and they made joint appearances at mental health awareness events, sharing their own struggles with grief and emotional wellness. "Talking about Mummy has made me realize that keeping her memory alive isn't about preserving sadness," Harry reflected during one of their regular family dinners. "It's about continuing the joy she brought to everything she touched." Queen Elizabeth, now in her 90s, had watched the healing process in her grandsons with deep satisfaction. She had carried the weight of Diana's final requests for over 2 decades, waiting for the right moment to deliver her daughter-in-law's gifts. Seeing how those gifts had transformed not just William and Harry, but their entire approach to family and royal duty, validated her patient guardianship of Diana's legacy. "Your mother would be so proud of the men you've become," she told them during one of their weekly visits to Windsor Castle. "But more than that, she would be thrilled to see how you're raising your children. She always believed that the most important royal duty was to be good people first, and you're passing that lesson on to the next generation." The annual memorial service for Diana had taken on new meaning as well. Instead of being a somber reminder of loss, it had become a celebration of continuing impact. William and Harry spoke about their mother's ongoing influence on their lives, sharing specific examples of how her guidance continued to shape their decisions. They invited young people who had benefited from Diana-inspired charitable programs to share their stories, showing how her compassion was still creating positive change in the world. George had attended his first memorial service that year. Sitting quietly between his parents as speaker after speaker, talked about his grandmother's kindness and generosity. After the service, he had asked William why everyone seemed so happy when they were talking about someone who had died. "Because Granny Diana's love didn't die with her," William had explained. "It kept growing through all the people she helped and through all the people who learned from her example. When we remember her, we're not just thinking about what we lost. We're celebrating everything she gave us that we still have." As the first anniversary of opening the memory box approached, William decided to add his own contribution to Diana's collection. He wrote a letter to his mother telling her about George and Charlotte, about the man he had become, about the ways her guidance continued to influence his daily life. The letter was honest about his struggles and failures, but also full of gratitude for the foundation of love she had given him. "I understand now why you made Granny wait until I became a father to give me your box," he wrote. "You knew that parenthood would help me appreciate the depth of your love, the complexity of your choices, and the wisdom of your guidance. Every day as I watch George and Charlotte grow, I understand more about the fierce protectiveness, the overwhelming joy, and the constant worry that defined your experience as our mother." He sealed the letter and placed it in the wooden box alongside Diana's original items, creating a bridge between past and present, between mother and son, between the woman who had loved him unconditionally and the father he was striving to become. The box would remain in his study, available whenever he needed guidance or simply wanted to feel connected to his mother's enduring love. But William knew now that Diana's most important gift hadn't been contained in that wooden box. It had been planted in his heart from birth and had simply needed time, experience, and the perspective of parenthood to fully bloom. As he turned the handle that had first brought such overwhelming emotion, William felt only peace. The tears that came now were tears of gratitude, not grief. Diana's love had found its way home at last. Not as a painful reminder of loss, but as a living legacy that would continue to grow and flourish through generations yet to come. The boy who had lost his mother had become a man who carried her, love forward, ensuring that her light would never dim but would shine brighter with each passing year, illuminating the path for his children and their children after them.